listening to in the mid-70s?
Well, in 77 I was 15, so before early 70s it was, the first record I bought was 72, I think it is T-Rex, 20th Century Boy, and then the progression from that to Bowie, and that was pretty much it. That sort of thing, and then the glamour of it was the attraction, I suppose. Edinburgh's a very bleak place in the mid-70s, really bleak. It was just, the photographs you see of Edinburgh then, it just, I mean, okay, most of them are black and white, but it's such a bleak place, there's nothing. And I suppose Bowie and that ilk brought out a kind of a colour. And I think that's where that kind of whole Edinburgh thing started to come from. I think speaking to Davie, speaking to Paul, speaking to all of those people, Bowie was an influence. I think I was too young to really get the punk thing. I mean, punk was over by 78 as far as I'm concerned. But we'd started listening to bands like Wire, and that was our side of the colour. It was kind of a sharper, bleaker, more angular side of things. And Can, we were listening to Can, we still do. Those were our kind of influences, that kind of krautrock, and then the kind of more artistic side of punk, I suppose. Well, I think the whole the artistic side of it being making your own sleeves, making your own records, making the kind of cottage industry side of thing appealed to us greatly, and it's something that we took on later into Finitribe, was doing everything ourselves, making films, editing, like the way you used to edit, like chopping up tape and sticking it together, making tape loops. It was experimental. It was like, 3 chords didn't particularly interest me. I can't play more than 3 chords, but it's the way you put 3 chords together, and then you can make as many chords as you like by chopping it up and tape loops and things like that. So it was more, I think punk certainly opened up it to you being allowed to do anything you wanted. And I suppose that's where the pop group and came to the fore, because it wasn't standard punk rock. It was much more intelligent than that.
And did you try?
They started at school, and we somehow became friends with a band called Visitors, who we didn't fall in with Joseph K and Fire Engines. We fell in with Visitors and kind of followed that path, which was very bleak again, very kind of minimal, experimental, opinionated to the point of arrogance. And I think, certainly looking back, I think we were incredibly arrogant. I think there was a huge arrogance around the whole thing, but it kind of fired it. It kind of made it kind of really quite vital. No one was afraid to say what they said. And there was a real tension between those camps, between Visitors and Fire Engines and Joseph K, and a rivalry, to the point of just pure dislike. We didn't like each other. Even though I loved Fire Engines and Joseph K, I didn't feel I was allowed to say that. You weren't allowed to be you had to be in one gang or the other gang. So we didn't mix. There was no mixing at all. And a real dislike, I think. I think we were all very opinionated. I think we all thought we were better than each other. I think we were more interested in we'd come through like listening to Can, Wire. I think they'd come through more listening to Velvet Underground. It was very different. I think we kind of moved quite quickly more to a kind of industrial. There was lots of greys and metals. I think we remained with the kind of colour of Edinburgh, whereas Fire Engine Joseph K kind of offered a brighter perspective on life and a more pop angle to things, whereas we were quite determined to kind of be stern and walk about with Albert Camus books in your pocket and looking very grim and having floppy fringe haircuts and long coats, which we called Sam coats, which I believe, as we spoke about, I think comes from a reference from Samuel Beckett. So we were just bleak and proud of it, and they hated the bleakness of us, and we hated the glamour of them, even though secretly I loved the glamour of them. I don't know if we really knew what we were reacting against. I think you just had to react, because it was fun, it was mischievous. Chris and I once, just to wind people up, we met Paul Hagen. Well, we didn't meet Paul Hagen, but we were in a club with Paul Hagen. We hated him so much that we set his jacket on fire. And I love Paul now, and Paul will have heard that story from me several times, and we'll have laughed about it since. But it was just we kind of thought it was pretentious and arrogant and far too glamorous, even though I think we were very envious and jealous of the kind of... They'd almost become stars at that point. I mean, maybe just stars in Scotland, but they appeared to be like stars, and we weren't stars at all. We were kind of anti-star, I suppose. Yeah, I think that's where I would imagine that's really where our shaved heads came from. We all had shaved heads for a while, and that was born out of our association with Psychic TV and Throbbing Gristle. I mean, I remember going to Genesis' house one day and being terrified, absolutely terrified, arriving. Chris was quite happy, but we were shown into a room, and John and I were just sitting there wondering what the hell. He's away to make us something to eat. What the fuck is he going to make us to eat? Is he going to poison us? Is he going to kill us? And then he came back through about 5 minutes later and said, "You do realise I hear everything you say. I record everything that goes on in this room." And then when we were leaving, there was an axe on the back of the front door. So he was quite a character. Yeah. The visitors came from the same area of town as Paul did. They went to the same school together, and they may have been, I don't know if they were slightly younger or slightly older, but they came from Ox Gangs, Derek and John, who were the main protagonists. Their first single, Electric Heat, is just probably one of the most bleak records you can ever hear. And the sleeve of the single is the four of them sitting around a three-bar electric fire in a snowy field. It's you almost feel cold touching it. And they did it very well. I mean, I think, and they really believed it. They were huge. John Peel was a huge fan of theirs. Paid for them to go to London and do sessions. He was a massive supporter of them. They were angry, political. They shouted a lot. If people didn't respond in their gigs, they would stop playing and they would shout at them. Shout at people, why hadn't people come to gigs? Why don't people come to gigs in Edinburgh? They were really a force, I felt. And that's why I liked them so much, was because they were never afraid to say what they felt. And they were not liked for that. They weren't a popular band. People didn't like them particularly much. They certainly weren't big in Edinburgh or big in the Scottish scene, but I think they played a very important part in that Scottish scene, because they were the kind of counter to Joseph Kay and the Fire Engines. They looked different. They were both Derek and John are over 6 feet, very thin, very imposing characters, and looked amazing. I mean, as much as the music was important, and the music isn't always important, how people see you and how people look at you is also important, and what you put across as your image lasts. I mean, I'll never forget John and Derek, the way they look and the way everything was black, black suits, black shirts, black coats. I suppose you could have said they were kind of fascistic, but they weren't really. But I think people thought they were. Really, again, strident, really minimal, angular. John had this old keyboard. I can't even remember the name of it, but it was just a very distinctive keyboard sound they had. So it was keyboard, bass, and drums and guitar, and just solid, just really, really solid, and very anti the kind of not so much Fire Engine Joseph K, but the kind of the whole Faye thing with Glasgow and the Orange Juice and Aztec Camera, which again was a bit Blair, but I didn't like that much. Although I love Edwin now and his music now, but for me it was all too West Coast, far too West Coast.
From Finitribe.
I think again through probably wanting to be different, admiring what they'd done, and our own self-determination to do what we wanted to do. We became quite elitist and up our own backsides, to be honest. We even wrote a song called "Who the Hell Do You Think You Are?" because we used to go to pubs and people would stare at us. We always go together. 6 of us always went together everywhere we go, and people would just go, "Who the fuck do they think they are?" So we wrote a song which had a chorus of "Who the hell do you think you are?" in it, which I believe latterly, because we became friends with the Spice Girls producer, became one of their lyrics, which we were never credited for, which we had. But yeah, we were pretty self-important. I think it kind of not. I don't think we were ever horrible, but I think we were pretty arrogant about. And I think you need to be that to be in a band. There has to be a certain arrogance to believe that what you play is good and people will want, and makes people follow you. It makes people kind of listen to you if you believe in what you do. And I think with that, unfortunately, a bit of arrogance can come with it. I don't really remember there being any electronic bands. Eggy Bamyazi from Stirling, and yeah, certainly we started Finitribe in 1984, and it wasn't really electronic at that point. It was pretty much guitars, bass, drums, keyboards. It wasn't until a little bit later when we heard the Sheffield bands like Chack and the whole, which is kind of the early formation of Warp, really, that we bought a sampler, and that buying a sampler in I think 1980, when did we make one? I don't know, 86. That changed everything. Then we moved very quickly to get rid of guitars, drums, and the people that played them.
Podcast, did that feel like an extension of what you were trying to before, like to stand out alone by having much more like electronic sound?
Yeah. I mean, even the early Finitribe stuff, we carried on that kind of standout thing, and we weren't liked either. We were not. I mean, I remember getting terrible reviews from Alan Campbell and various other people that we were just copyists for Test Department and that sort of thing. But I don't think we were. I think we were much more. We were our own unit, and there were 6 of us at the time, and I think we were fairly strong, but we became very quickly interested in electronic music, but also because of it had been there in the past with Kraftwerk and Can, and it just seeped in, and it seemed to be the natural thing for us to do was to become electronic, and buying a sampler, and then Sonic sampler was the thing that changed it all. Yeah, I mean, we stubbornly remained Edinburgh based pretty much the whole time we were together. I think probably to our detriment at times, but we'd already bought a building, so we'd started a kind of industry, which went on to we made our own T-shirts, we made our own records, we had everything. We had a recording studio, we had a T-shirt manufacturing. We were our own little industry, which we were quite proud of, and
Would that be part of almost going like full circle into beginnings of punk, the DIY ethic?
Yeah. I mean, certainly the first single, we did everything. We did everything for that single. We coloured the posters in. We folded the posters up, put the sleeves together. We designed the artwork. That was important to us. That was really important to us. And still, really, to this day, it remains important to us. The single we just did in January, Andy, who was in the band at the time, did the sleeve. It's important to us to kind of maintain, to kind of hold on to as much of the kind of the making of our product as possible. We didn't feel the need to go to London particularly, although I think people thought we should. I think we were stronger up here because our families were here, our friends were here. It was. I think if we'd moved to London, we would become a little bit more disparate and maybe gone separate ways quicker. But I think Edinburgh's a great place to live, so I don't think we'd really felt that we needed to go anywhere. And it was part of our arrogance that people think that you have to go to London to make music work, and that's never been the case. And I think a lot of the success of the bands in Glasgow has been based on the fact that they didn't move south. They stayed amongst their community and made it work there. And I still think that to this day. I don't think there's any need to go to London. Certainly now, there's no need to go to London with the advent of technology and the internet, and you just don't need that at all. I guess London record companies were all there. We visited regularly, but we always came home. Well, I mean, Paul. I think Paul's last album he pretty much made on his iPad. So, I mean, Paul and I have talked a lot about the technology we've bought in the past, and I remember going into a shop in Edinburgh and spending £21,000 on 3 samplers, and you just don't need to do that anymore. I mean, the last time we made an album, in 1998, there was no real internet at that point. There was no Facebook. There was no social media whatsoever. So it was you had to kind of go through a kind of make a record, tour it, rely on the NME. You don't have to rely on that any of that anymore, which I think is great. It's good. Yeah, Chris left. The band kind of split up in about 1988. Chris went off to join the Revolting Cocks with Al Jorgensen. We'd worked with Wax Trax on 2 singles. We'd signed to Wax Trax in Chicago and did 2 singles with them. And then I think Chris was kind of smitten with the whole idea of Chicago and the industrial scene that was coming out of that, and was asked to join Revolting Cocks, and then subsequently left. We'd got to a point where we were just, nothing was happening. And all of a sudden, by mistake, actually I was with Stephen Pastel in Leeds, I think, and James Brown, who went on to edit, or did he release Loaded, the magazine Loaded? He came up to me and said, "You do realise that your record is huge in Ibiza?" And it was a record called The Testimony, which had a bell tune on it. And Paul Oakenfold, Danny Rampling, and various others, Trevor Fung, had taken this record to Ibiza, where the clubs at that time played what was called Balearic, which could be the Waterboys, could be Depeche Mode, could be Finitribe, could be Finitribe, could be Wooden Tops, a kind of mishmash of various different styles. But anyway, our record became huge in Ibiza, and from the point of just about to split up the whole thing, Pete Tong phones up and says, "We want to license this record," and that changed everything. I'd actually started working for Fast Forward at that point, which had come out of Fast, the distribution company. So we were again quite luckily placed to get that record back out and start the whole thing again. Really, we were rejuvenated by this one record. Fast Forward wasn't a record shop. It was just part of the cartel and a distribution outlet. When I worked there, it was in Alva Street. I think it had, when Bob had the Fast, it was very close to here at some point. and then it became distribution, and then I don't know the relationship when it became Fast Forward, but yeah, it was part of the cartel, a great outlet for just about everybody in Scotland who wanted to release a record. Sandy had various labels, 53rd and 3rd, Vaseline's, BMX Bandits, and that's kind of how I got to know those guys, and that's how I got to know the kind of Glasgow school. Even ended up tour managing some of them, Pastels and Norma. So yeah, I mean, it was a good time as well. I mean, it was a kind of very there was always records coming out. It was a very productive. It was great to have that facility in Edinburgh. That there was a point, a hub, where everyone can meet, and you weren't. Well, it was a social thing as well. I mean, people used to come down, just sit in the office and talk about music. It was just one of the great things about music that brings people together. You know, so I've always thought that I would like to have a record shop, not necessarily to make any money, but just to have your buddies around. And that's kind of what Fast Forward was like. It was just like lots of buddies hanging out, making the odd phone call here and there, selling the odd record. But really we're just kind of having a laugh. Sandy would probably see it differently. It was his business. Although, you know, the thing is, all those people are still making music. Everyone is, and they're all just as strong about their views and thoughts on music as they ever were. I think the Vaselines have just released a new album. The Pastels album is up for Scottish Album of the Year this year. So, you know, it's great that it's sustained over a period of 30 years, and there's no sign of it stopping. It's a really strong scene. I think Edinburgh's had a less strong of a scene. I was listening earlier on to something you were saying, and I don't think music stopped coming to Edinburgh, but I think it kind of after 1981, the scene kind of stopped. There was very much a lull in this. The music was being made in Edinburgh, and it didn't really pick up again. Reformed is maybe a little bit strong. We released it. There was the Detest Me single I was talking about 2 years ago was its 25th anniversary, and various people licensed it for compilations that year. A guy in London, Trevor Jackson, who's quite a big DJ, said to me he wanted to license it, and he said you should re-release it. So I went through a process of about a year of finding people to remix it, and finally released it in its 26th anniversary in January. But it's prompted people to come forward and say, well, you should do this, you should do that. So we are doing some reissues this year and a reissue album next year. But John and I, who hadn't worked together for nearly 9-10 years, actually 15 years, we've decided we're going to do a new project as well, very much on the lines of how we started, in that we have a studio, we have the facility to make our own music, to distribute ourselves, and we have the equipment to go out and play live as well. So it's kind of the same thing. But the main thing is this time that it has to be fun. We signed various major record deals, and I think that ruined our development. We were given lots of money at various different points, and I think it destroyed the kind of ethic that we had. So we're very much now about having some fun and making music and see where it takes us, which is why we started.